Out in West Texas, where the Chihuahuan Desert meets the sky, there's a stretch of empty land outside Marfa that locals treat with respect. Not fear, exactly. More like the kind of caution you save for things you can't explain. Things like the lights that dance out there in the darkness. First reported back in 1883 by a cowhand named Robert Ellison. Thought he was seeing Apache campfires at first. Spent hours riding toward them, never got any closer. Next morning, no tracks, no ashes, no sign anyone had been there at all, just empty desert. Apache knew about them long before that, called them ghost fires. Said they were spirits of warriors, still fighting battles in the night sky. But their shamans, they had a different word for them. Meant something like the hungry lights. Never did explain why they used that particular term. Met a border patrol agent last month at my usual stop. Woman had this look in her eyes. Kind of hollow, kind of haunted. Said she'd been working the night shift. Saw what looked like headlights out in the desert. Protocol says, check it out. Could be smugglers. Could be someone in trouble. She followed those lights for 3 hours. Sometimes they'd be right ahead of her truck, clear as day. Then they'd suddenly be miles away, or behind her, or dancing in circles around her vehicle. Radio started picking up voices. Not Spanish, not English. Something older. Something that made her dog start howling in frequencies she'd never heard before. Scientists tried studying them back in 2004, set up all kinds of equipment, spectrometers, infrared cameras, atmospheric sensors. Data showed something impossible. Said those lights were putting out heat signatures matching human body temperature. Moving in patterns that suggested intelligence. Responding to observers like they knew they were being watched. These days, tourists gather at the viewing platform outside town. Most nights they see something. Distant lights, moving in ways lights shouldn't move. But locals? They know better than to watch too long. Because sometimes those lights, they notice you noticing them. Had a rancher tell me about finding cattle out there. Not dead exactly, just empty. Like something had scooped out everything inside, left the skin behind. Always in a perfect circle, always facing the same direction. Always with their eyes wide open. Like they'd seen something they couldn't understand. Drove through there myself last summer. Middle of nowhere. No other cars for miles. Saw them dancing on the horizon. Yellow-white, sometimes red, moving like they were alive. Then they started moving toward my truck. Temperature gauge went crazy. Radio cycled through stations by itself. Caught voices speaking in what sounded like backward Spanish. Then they surrounded me. Couldn't have been more than 50 feet away. Close enough to see that they weren't just lights. There was something inside them. Something moving. Something watching. Dashboard clock stopped at 3:33 a.m. Stayed that way for what felt like hours. When they finally left, found 3 hours of dash cam footage completely blank. Except for one frame, shows something that looks like a window opening in the air. Something reaching through. Something made of light. But wrong, somehow. Like light trying to remember how to be solid. So if you're driving through West Texas at night and you see lights dancing in the desert, don't stop. Don't watch too long. And whatever you do, don't flash your lights back at them. Because some lights, they're not meant to guide you home. Some lights are hungry for something else entirely. Some mysteries don't need solving, some lights don't need watching, and some dances are really just hunts in disguise. Most folks know Lake Champlain for the tourist stories. Cute tales about Champ, their friendly lake monster, but spend a night with the old fishing families up there in Vermont. The ones who've worked those waters for generations. They'll tell you something different, something darker. See, Native Americans warned the first settlers about the lake, said there were places you shouldn't fish, times you shouldn't be on the water, called it Nahunganuk, the lake monster. But that translation ain't quite right. In their language, it meant something more like that which hunts from below. Met a commercial fisherman last month at my usual stop. Third generation on those waters. Man's hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his coffee. Said he'd been out in the early hours before dawn. Water was still as glass. Fog so thick you couldn't see the shore. Then he heard it. Something breathing. Something big. Wasn't like any fish or diving bird he knew. Sounded more like a whale's blowhole, but wrong somehow. Too deep. Too deliberate. Then his depth finder went crazy. Showed something massive moving under his boat. Something that, according to his instruments, shouldn't have fit in a lake that size. These days, the tourist boats stick to daylight hours, but back in the 70s, they tried running sunset cruises. Stopped after what happened to the Mountain Queen. 40 passengers watched something rise from the depths. Something that made the captain radio, in one word, before the electronics died. Wrong. And found the boat 3 days later drifting in the middle of the lake. Empty. No signs of struggle, no bodies. Just empty. Except for the claw marks. Deep grooves in the metal hull, going up. Like something had reached up from below. Tried to pull the whole boat under. Local diving teams won't go down past certain depths anymore. Not since '98, when they lost contact with 2 divers investigating an underwater cave system. Retrieved their cameras 3 months later. Footage showed something moving in the darkness. Something with eyes that reflected light, like mirrors. Something that knew how to wait. Scientists say the lake's too small to hide anything that big, but the old-timers, they'll tell you about the underwater caves. Miles of them, going deeper than any surveys mapped. Some say they connect to other waters. Some say they lead somewhere else entirely. Drove past there myself last fall, around midnight. Lake was calm. Moon was full. Caught something moving out there in my headlights. Something breaking the surface, bigger than any fish should be. But it wasn't the size that bothered me. It was the way it moved. Like it was watching, thinking, waiting. Then I heard it. That breathing sound, coming through my radio. Static cleared just long enough to hear something else too. Sonar pings, like a submarine's. But these were different. Sounded more like calling. Like something down there was calling for others. to rise. So if you're ever up around Lake Champlain at night, and you see those tourist boats tied up safe at the dock, there's a reason they don't run after dark. Because some lakes, they hide more than monsters. Some lakes hide hunger, ancient hunger, the kind that's waited centuries to feed. Some mysteries float on the surface. Some horrors hide in the depths. And some monsters were here long before us, and they'll be here long after we're gone.